I stood at the threshold of my own home, the keys freezing in my hand as the sound of my 7-year-old daughter sobbing echoed down the hallway. I had just come home early after successfully completing a grueling 6-hour patient surgery, expecting a quiet afternoon. Instead, the front door was unlocked, and the air inside was thick with toxic, familiar voices. My own parents were standing in my living room, shouting threats and towering over my terrified little girl, while my older sister was down the hall, aggressively ransacking my master bedroom. They were tearing my life apart, looking for my jewelry and the legal deeds to my apartment. They smiled when they thought they had trapped me, but they forgot one thing: a surgeon doesn't panic under pressure. Before you find out how I made them deeply regret ever setting foot in my house, follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Lila Bennett. I am 36 years old, and as a chief thoracic surgeon, my entire professional life is built on keeping my composure under immense pressure. In the operating room, when a patient's life hangs by a thread, panic is a luxury I cannot afford. I am trained to look at blood, chaos, and sudden crises with an icy, calculated calm. But nothing, absolutely nothing in my medical residency or my years in the hospital could have ever prepared me for the sickening scene waiting for me inside my own living room. The front door was unlocked, a heavy, bad feeling immediately settling in my chest. As I stepped over the threshold, the agonizing sound of my 7-year-old daughter sobbing pierced the silence of the hallway. I rushed inside, and there they were. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, stood in the center of the room like invading soldiers, shouting threats and towering over my terrified little girl. Meanwhile, loud crashing sounds echoed from down the hall. My older sister, Vanessa, was aggressively ransacking my master bedroom. They were tearing my drawers apart, looking for my inherited family jewelry and the legal deeds to my apartment. When my parents noticed me standing there, their expressions hardened into pure malice. They loudly claimed I owed them everything because I had abandoned the family to pursue my wealthy medical career while they struggled. They thought they had trapped a weak, grieving woman, completely unaware that they had just crossed a line from which they could never return. To understand how my own flesh and blood could look at me with such calculated malice, you have to understand the toxic family dynamic that had been brewing for over a decade. I bought this luxury high-end apartment completely on my own, working brutal 80-hour weeks during my medical residency, sacrificing my sleep, my youth, and my mental health while saving every single penny. Meanwhile, my older sister Vanessa was the golden child who could do no wrong. She wasted all of her money, along with a massive inheritance from our grandparents, on a failing luxury lifestyle, endless vacations, and disastrous business ventures funded entirely by our enabling parents. Arthur and Eleanor had spent years treating me like an expendable outsider, completely ignoring my achievements, and only calling me when they needed a handout. But the moment they realized exactly how successful my medical career had become, their indifference quickly turned into intense greed. Vanessa's debts had finally caught up with her, and instead of taking responsibility, they all decided that my hard-earned success belonged to them. They genuinely believed that because we shared the same blood, they had a right to walk into my home and steal the foundation I had built for my daughter. This intrusion wasn't a sudden burst of anger. It was a desperate, pre-planned plot to strip me of everything I owned to bail Vanessa out of her own self-inflicted financial ruin. My clinical training kicked in immediately, overriding the burning rage inside me. In a tense situation, screaming only escalates the crisis, and right now, my main priority was protecting my terrified, crying daughter. I needed them out of my space so I could think. So I decided to use their own arrogance against them by playing completely into their hands. I took a deep breath, let my shoulders drop, and forced my voice to tremble as if I were a broken woman entirely intimidated by their overwhelming presence. I looked at Arthur, Eleanor, and a smug Vanessa who had just walked back into the living room, and told them that I couldn't fight them anymore. I claimed that the stress of my medical career and raising my daughter alone had left me exhausted. With tears welling up in my eyes, I quietly agreed to sign over the legal deeds to the apartment and hand over my entire jewelry box in exactly 3 days. I just begged them to leave my home immediately so I could calm my daughter down. Seeing me seemingly defeated and on the verge of a breakdown made Vanessa smirk with absolute triumph. Arthur patted his jacket pocket, telling me that they would be waiting for my call, while Eleanor sneered that it was about time I showed some family loyalty. The three of them walked out of my apartment gloating and laughing down the corridor, entirely convinced they had successfully broken me. They truly believed they had won an easy victory, completely unaware that their short-lived celebration was actually the first step into a carefully planned trap. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the helpless, broken expression vanished from my face. I carried my daughter to her bedroom, holding her tight until her breathing slowed and she finally fell into a restless sleep. Once she was safe, I walked back into my home office and pulled up the encrypted cloud feed for my hidden home security cameras. As I fast-forwarded through the footage of them tearing through my master bedroom, my blood ran cold. Vanessa wasn't just looking for property deeds or jewelry boxes. The camera clearly showed her taking high-resolution photos of my medical credentials, my passport, my social security card, and my private financial statements. She was looking to steal my identity. The next morning, I bypassed our useless family lawyer and contacted a high-profile corporate attorney who specialized in financial crimes. Together, we began digging into my family's recent financial history, and what we uncovered was a massive, hidden web of fraud. 3 months ago, when Vanessa's luxury lifestyle began collapsing, my parents had helped her orchestrate a desperate scheme. They had used my stolen personal information and an expertly forged signature to secure a massive $400,000 commercial loan for Vanessa's failed business venture, using my name as the primary guarantor. They had already defaulted on the very first payment, and the bank was preparing to come after me. They hadn't just broken into my home to steal physical assets. They had systematically set a trap to completely destroy my financial life and medical career to cover up their own crimes. But they had left a pristine paper trail, and I was about to use it to crush them. 2 days later, I set my plan into motion by orchestrating a formal meeting under the exact pretense they were expecting: signing over the apartment transfer papers. Instead of inviting them back to my home, I rented a prestigious, high-end corporate conference room downtown. I called Sydney, the sharp corporate attorney my lawyer had recommended, to sit beside me, while I dialed Arthur and told him that everything was ready for their signatures. The family arrived exactly on time, practically radiating arrogance. Vanessa walked in wearing a brand-new designer coat she clearly couldn't afford, while Arthur and Eleanor strutted into the room as if they already owned the building. They had brought along their own cheap real estate attorney, a man who looked distinctly uncomfortable being in such a high-end corporate firm. They looked at me with smug satisfaction, assuming I was the same broken, terrified woman who had begged them for mercy in her living room 48 hours ago. Vanessa didn't even bother to hide her smirk as she slid into the leather chair across from me, casually asking if I had brought the jewelry box along with the deeds. I didn't say a word. I simply sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, keeping my hands folded calmly in my lap, matching their greedy smiles with a perfectly calm, icy demeanor. I let them unpack their pens and adjust their cuffs, letting their false sense of absolute victory build to a crescendo. They truly believed they were seconds away from legally draining my life savings and walking away with my home. They had no idea that the stage was set, and they had walked right into my theater. I reached into my bag and pulled out several thick packets of documents, calmly sliding them across the polished mahogany table toward my family. Vanessa grabbed the papers instantly, her greedy fingers fumbling with the clips, while her cheap attorney leaned over her shoulder to inspect the paperwork. But as they began to read the first page, their arrogant smiles instantly vanished. Their attorney went completely pale, his hands visibly shaking as his eyes darted rapidly across the lines of text. They weren't looking at property transfer deeds or jewelry asset agreements at all. Instead, they were staring directly at a comprehensive, binding legal notification detailing charges of grand larceny, identity theft, breaking and entering, and corporate banking fraud. I looked directly at my sister's horrified face and explained that my hidden home security cameras had captured every single second of her illegal search. I then revealed the thick stack of financial bank records my lawyer had uncovered, exposing the $400,000 fraudulent commercial loan they had secretly taken out using my forged signature and stolen credentials. The room fell into a deathly, suffocating silence as Arthur stared at me in absolute shock, his jaw dropping open. I calmly informed them that the bank's fraud division and the local police investigators had already been fully notified of their actions. The documents in front of them were a formal, legally binding confession of their systemic financial crimes. I gave them a simple, freezing choice: sign these admissions immediately, or the police officers waiting downstairs would come up to place them under public arrest. Faced with the undeniable evidence of their crimes, they signed the papers with trembling hands. The consequences were swift and devastating for them. My attorney used the signed confessions to completely remove my name from the fraudulent loan, forcing the bank to go after Vanessa directly. Unable to pay back the $400,000 or her massive gambling debts, Vanessa was forced to declare total bankruptcy and received 3 years of court-mandated legal probation for identity theft. To keep her out of a jail cell, Arthur and Eleanor had to liquidate their own retirement savings and downsize to a tiny rented apartment in a rough part of town, losing the very social status they had tried so desperately to protect. Meanwhile, I packed up my life, sold the downtown apartment, and moved my daughter to a beautiful, quiet home closer to my hospital. Our new life is peaceful, filled with laughter, and entirely free of their toxic greed. What would you have done if your own family broke into your home and tried to ruin your life? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more stories of sweet justice, click on the videos appearing on your screen right now. Thank you for watching until the very end.